Welcome to episode 91 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Erin, welcome to Anchored in Education today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I am excited that I can finally get you on as a guest and to talk about this topic that I know is very close to your heart and mine as well. And I can't wait to share more about inclusion and why we need to be, having this conversation more. But before we get into that, we'd like to find out a little bit more about you and how you became anchored in education.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an associate professor at Vanderbilt University in the special ed department. I work within the early childhood special ed and the applied behavior analysis programs. I teach courses both in content, so related to assessment of young children, and I teach a single case research course as well. So my bachelor's degree is in child development, and I have a master's from DePaul University in early childhood education.
Okay.
And I was a Chicago public school teacher before I came back I actually got my PhD at Vanderbilt many years ago. So I was a Chicago public school teacher for several years. I taught in a segregated setting, actually, in an elementary school, and I taught, across the years, there were anywhere from 10 to 12 little kids who had an autism eligibility. So most of the children had autism or autism-like symptoms, and they were in my classroom.
Well, that's exciting. I guess, I knew a little about your past and how you were anchored in education, but I guess I have forgotten that you were in Chicago public school system. So
yeah. I grew up in Chicago and taught at a school, not the school I went to, but a school just a couple miles away from the neighborhood I grew up in. So,
oh, that's exciting. Now, I heard you talking whenever you were in CPS. You mentioned segregated, and so we're going to get in and take a deeper dive into today's conversation. But as you say that, I'm reminded of a graphic that I've seen in which it has kind of dots representing students, but it has there's one that's exclusion, one that is segregation, one that is inclusion, one that is integration. And so I think that it would be best, before we take that deeper dive, if we define inclusion and what it looks like in our schools.
Yeah, that is a great way to start, and also difficult, but I'm going to do the best I can.
No, sure.
I like to define inclusion as according to access, participation, and supports.
Okay.
And that is not my original idea. The Division for Early Childhood of the Council for Exceptional Children and the National Association for the Education of Young Children in 2009 came out with a joint position statement supporting inclusion for all young children. And they defined it according to those aspects. So access, participation, and supports. Access means, of course, physical access. So does the child actually have access to the physical environment, the same physical environment that their peers do? But it also means instructional access, access to the social environment, access to learning, access to the same materials. So it's not just physical, it's all of the other things that are happening in the environment as well, which, of course, for me, that social aspect is so important. Full access to the entire community is how we define access. And then participation is the child included as a participating member rather than just a child who maybe like comes to the classroom part of the day or is in the classroom but also spends, time in another classroom. Is the child viewed as and supported as a full participating member of that community and that classroom community and the broader community as well? And then supports are the appropriate supports given to ensure that the child has access and is a participating member. And what I think is really important about the supports is, are the supports sufficient to ensure that the child is learning, is engaging, is making friends, is a full participating member of that environment? And are the supports appropriate such that the child is learning to be independent and advocate for their needs? So there's that like continuum of supports. We don't want the child to be so supported that they never learn how to advocate for themselves. They never learn how to like say, no, I don't want to do that right now. Or they never learn how to be independent, take care of themselves, to make friends, but also that they're given the supports that they need to ensure that they can fully participate. So that's how I like to define inclusion. Not, of course, not one sentence, not one word, but it's complex. And it's important, I think, that it's complex because every child is going to have different needs.
Well, it absolutely is complex. And I think it's important. That's why we have this conversation, is because, I think a lot of times school districts believe they have a fully inclusive program. But when we look at the three things that you defined it as, it's not. And it could be something as simple as, like you said, the supports. A lot of times we tend to put maybe an extra classroom aide in there or a one-to-one aide. And if that's what the student needs, then that's absolutely fine. But that student still has to be able to, to be given the opportunity to function independently. And so I think that's part. Now, you referenced 2009 and the letter that came out, and I pulled some numbers, and I believe it's probably around the same time they put that letter out. So when I look at inclusion numbers in 2009, only 59% of students with disabilities spent 80% or more of their instructional time in the general education classroom. So then I went to, I believe, what was the next available number, which was 2019, 10 years later. And the number has gone up to 66%. So we won't argue that an increase is definitely good. This slow climb has been a trend for decades, but can you help us understand why we are so delayed in providing inclusion when the research is clear on best practice?
Yeah. So I think there's there are lots of reasons and lots of challenges to inclusion. One thing that is important, I think, to note right now as well is that, unfortunately, I believe post-COVID, the numbers have probably gone down. Oh. So I think that if we looked at numbers, unfortunately, post-COVID, children are included at a even lower percentage, which is unfortunate, and why the work that we're doing is so important right now. So the challenges there are many different challenges. The number one challenge reported is always attitudes and beliefs.
Okay.
So it's always that people don't think that a child is ready to be included. And of course, we know that it's not about the child being ready. It's about the environment being ready for the child. They don't think that they can provide evidence-based practices in inclusive settings. They don't think that inclusive settings can be as high of quality. They don't think families support inclusion. They think it'll take away from the other children in the environment. So attitudes and values are the number one reported challenge to inclusion. And the way we change attitudes and values is by changing behaviors. Okay. So what that usually means is that we have to get people to do it, and then get their buy-in, which is really difficult, as you can imagine, right?
I've been there, done that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to say, trust me, like as a leader, as a principal or an administrator. And that's, who I love to work with. Sometimes you just have to say, well, this is what we're doing. I get it. I get that it seems hard. It is hard. And I get that, there are all these barriers in place. But this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. And we're going to figure it out together. And this is why also it has to be this like program-wide, statewide initiative. It can't just, it can be, but it's most effective and scaled up and sustainable when it's a program-wide initiative or district-wide, statewide. Other challenges to include it, of course, are finance. So that administrators, programs believe that it's more expensive. We know that it is not more expensive. It is expensive.
Right.
Educating children is expensive.
It is.
Yeah, for sure. But we're committed to doing it, thank goodness, as a society. And so there are many ways to braid funding and to figure out how to do it in a way such that it's not more expensive. There are challenges related to training and supports. So making sure that we're providing and that we really truly understand the law related to, or IDEA, and the law related to providing technical assistance, providing supports. There are challenges related to of course, transportation is often reported as a challenge. We know it doesn't have to be, but it's oftentimes reported as a challenge. There are what we call kind of like turf wars that, being interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary is difficult. So getting different disciplines to work together. Adult collaboration is hard. So adults, we oftentimes, we really have to learn how to collaborate. Collaboration and teaming are skills that we have to learn. And many of us these days, these skills are included in most teacher prep, professional preparatory programs, but they weren't for all of us. And so there are a lot of us out there who don't necessarily know the best ways to team or collaborate with others and maybe don't want to. And so there are like turf wars, like, this is my IEP goal, or this is a skill that I'm working on, or this is my child even. And so adult collaboration is a challenge as well. Those are the major challenges.
So I want to unpack a couple things out of that. And I want to start with going all the way back to when you mentioned beliefs. And because I've seen that within the school system, but do we have any indication on research as far as what parents' beliefs are? Do they tend to lean towards inclusion, or do they have the same apprehension that our professional educators have?
So overwhelmingly, when programs are high quality and when inclusion is done in the way that we know it's supposed to be done, overwhelmingly parents support inclusion. Okay. Parents of children who don't have IEPs and parents of children who do have IEPs. What we know is that inclusive programs tend to be high quality because they tend to bring in professionals and people who are skilled at working with a range of children. And so they tend to be higher quality. And so parents tend to be very satisfied with inclusive programs. So overwhelmingly, parents support these programs. Parents of children with disabilities, they're the number one reported goal and concern is that their child has friends.
Okay.
So we hear that over and over again. And that is going to happen in inclusive environments when it's supported. And so, yes, we know that parents, of course, they are apprehensive sometimes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say that's typical for any parent sending their child to school. I think especially sometimes because of course, this means that, children are like 3 years old and going into like inclusive environments, and they're babies still,
right.
We, report their age in months still.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So wherever they go, I think parents would be apprehensive. But what we know is that these programs tend to be higher quality. Children get the supports they need. All children, not just children who have IEPs or IFSPs. And that's meaningful.
Well, and when you mention the high quality programs, that kind of goes into the second part of what I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit more. You said the turf wars. And
Yeah.
I mean, I get it because I've seen it. But at the same time, I've then seen what programs look like when there is that true collaboration. And that is when we get that highest quality, when we recognize the experts in the room and we value opinions and we put it together.
Yeah. Oh, it can be so beautiful when it's done well. I didn't fully. So when I was a teacher in Chicago Public Schools, I actually was in night school, in graduate school at night to get the training to be the teacher. So my degree was in child development. I had no experience as a classroom teacher. I had been assistant teachers as part of my undergraduate program and had experiences with children with disabilities. But basically, this is all to say I had no clue what I was doing. No clue what I was doing. But I happened to have this speech pathologist who was exceptional. And so all of the children in my classroom had autism. And so they all had communication and language goals. And she was like, I can either pull them out one by one and bring them over to my office, and that'll be like really boring and super inefficient, or I can come into your classroom every day and we can plan an activity and we can do something together. And so she was in my classroom every day, sometimes twice a day, depending on like what the activities were. But we would do large groups, we would do small groups. And so we had to collaborate on like what the lessons were, what goals we were going to work on. And I learned that from her. At first I was like, I was a teacher and I was young and naive and didn't know what I was doing and was overwhelmed. And so there was always this part of me that was like, can't you just take them out for a little bit? Like just take them out. But I quickly realized that no, when she comes into the classroom, we get to do these rich, meaningful activities where we're addressing so many goals and we get to do them together. And I learned so much from watching her. And we got to do some small groups, like I said, and some larger groups. And of course, we did some one-on-one throughout the day as well, as children needed it. But over time, they needed that less and less. And so we used to do these every Friday. We would do this cooking activity. We would make cookies. I had she helped me develop this whole like very simple token economy system where children were like giving each other coins. And we had this whole area of the room where they could use their coins to get something. And this was, before I was trained as a behavior analyst too. It was really this speech path and I worked together to do this. And the OT who we worked with at first was taking children out. She at first was pulling kids out, but she saw how amazing it was to collaborate and to do stuff. So then after like the first 6 months, she started coming in. And so we were doing things with the OT too. And it just was beautiful. And so then for the rest of my time there, the next several years, we collaborated and we did things together. The OT, the speech, the OT and I worked together to address kids' goals in the classroom. And it was more efficient and by far more meaningful for the children. And I've seen that done in many other classrooms since then. It just is more meaningful. Like I said, you're able to address a range of goals. I know you're able to be more efficient, and but it's hard work. It involves the adults working together to plan on the front end, but then the long-term results are much better.
Well, like you said, when it starts working, it is magical, and that's when I've seen. From the administrator side of things, it was even in speech that, when we started doing all of our speeches push-in services, that the speech teachers were even coming and saying that there had been students that, they maybe had identification of something speech, but not enough to qualify them. And so when you start doing speech with the whole group, you can even start working with, other students that aren't. And then I'm also taken back to when my son was in second grade, and OT pushed in for one or two other students, but then they came to me because I taught in the same school, and they said, we were kind of looking at the grip on his pencil, and he's like he's holding it like a claw or something, and they're like, would you care if we gave him like a pencil grip to teach him the proper grip? And, again, it happened because the services were pushed in and they just happened to look over and see my son. And I think that is where that magic is that we're talking about. And it sets us up. So let's talk about best practices for successful inclusion. Okay. One such approach is the blended instruction. And you explain this as when, quote, our curriculum is purposefully blended across ability levels to set the stage for teaching all children in inclusive classrooms. So let's spend a few minutes learning more about blended instruction and how we can utilize this approach to find success in our programs with our students.
Yeah. So a blended approach is when teachers and providers plan ahead of time which goals they're going to address during any period of time, that day, that week, how they're going to teach those goals, when they're going to teach those goals, and how they know when they have taught the goals, that the goals have been mastered. Okay. It involves embedding instruction across the day. So it's planning your day, it's planning the routines, it's planning the activities and the transitions. So what activities are happening when, what transitions are happening when, how the transitions are happening, how the activities are planning, how the activities are happening, which adults are going to be like at which center or which activity. And then it's about blending instruction such that you know what you're going to do, and you're also you're creating opportunities for other instructional moments to happen. So we often hear in early childhood this idea of teachable moments, and for me, I do love that term. However, if it's thought of in the wrong way, it can put the onus on the child to create those moments. And in blended instruction, the teacher and all of the practitioners are creating an environment such that teachable moments happen all day long. So, there's 100% chance you're going to teach certain goals, and you're also creating such a rich environment that there are going to be other opportunities for you to teach other skills as well, which include, of course, IEP goals, but the entire curriculum, whatever the curriculum is. That's, of course, based on the district state standards, but whatever the curriculum is, you're making sure there are opportunities to teach those as well as the IEP goals. And what I think is so beautiful about blended instruction as well is that it really helps you and supports practitioners in thinking about the entire learning cycle. So you're embedding instruction across the day, which includes embedding instruction around opportunities for acquiring new skills, becoming fluent in skills, and then generalizing and maintaining skills. So I think a lot of times for children with disabilities, we really focus on that acquisition. So they spend a lot of their day just learning new skills, which can be exhausting, Oh, sure. And so we want to make sure that we give them lots of opportunities throughout the day to show us what they know. And so we're intentionally planning for instruction related to generalization and maintenance. So letting children learn to use skills in new ways, with new materials, with new friends and new activities, new transitions, and also showing us what they do really well, like showing us, wow, remember when you couldn't do that? Now you can do that, and you do it by yourself. And, it's so cool. You can zip up your coat by yourself. Wow, now you get to go outside faster. So making sure that we have lots of opportunities throughout the day for children to show us what they do really well. And blended instruction helps us do that. So it helps us be really intentional about exactly what we're going to teach, and then also creating opportunities for teaching to happen.
And And it's a great explanation of blended instruction. But for our teachers that are going through a teacher prep program, are these practices being taught more as part of best practices whenever they're undergrads, and then, or is this something like advanced if they need to go back and get mastered for the ones that are already in classrooms?
It should be part of undergraduate programs, yeah, but it might not be, depending on the program, part of their undergraduate program. So if it's not, I would definitely say to go back. There are so many resources out there that can help you with this. There's an embedded instruction center out of the University of Florida. There are some websites. They have a website. My research lab has a website that has a little bit related to blended instruction, but then the Division for Early Childhood, their recommended practices, they have extensive supports related to blended instruction, and they have some like monographs, some resources that you might have to purchase, but a lot of their resources are for free. The actual recommended practices are freely available from the Division for Early Childhood website. And then there are other websites. The National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations is focused on social emotional competence, but they have just so many resources related to instruction as well.
And I think it's important, and I'm going to get some of these links that you talked about on today's episode's webpage, so people can seek out more information. And I think that it's important because when we talk about inclusion, we have to talk about quality, and that goes all the way back to the beginning of when schools say we're inclusive, but that doesn't. First of all, it doesn't mean that they are inclusive. Second of all, it doesn't mean that it is quality. And I'm not knocking any district right now. It's just something that we have to understand what quality implementation looks like to have a quality program. And I think too often, I believe we have best intentions of implementing inclusive practices, but we do so without having those quality programs. So what recommendations can you give us about making sure we have quality in our inclusive classrooms and programs?
Yeah, so I would say making sure that teachers have plenty of time to plan for instruction, and that teachers are planning instruction, and that you have a curriculum that you're using, and that you are monitoring child progress for all children using that curriculum, whatever the curriculum is. I'd prefer it's an evidence-based curriculum, but whatever the curriculum is, state standards, that you're monitoring your state standards, and that you are closely monitoring IEP goals, and that you're making sure that children with disabilities are learning their IEP goals as well as the general ed curriculum, whatever is in the gen ed curriculum. And then, of course, that other children are learning all of the other skills. Quality is also about family satisfaction, so that you are regularly engaging families and using many different modes to do that and methods to do that, and that you are collecting information on family satisfaction. And then the other thing that is critically important and this is kind of related to the curriculum, is that you are monitoring progress over time, and that when children perhaps are not making progress, you are making changes to instruction somehow to ensure that children make progress. So that you're not saying, well, this child isn't learning the goal, let's change the goal, or let's, I don't know, perhaps somehow blame it on the child, but that you're saying, no, I need to change the environment, or maybe I need to change the way I'm teaching it. Sometimes we do need to change the goal, but that you're saying that you are really looking at what you're doing, and maybe the child needs more intensity. Maybe the child needs more learning styles throughout the day. Maybe the child needs a different prompting system or a different way of supporting the child to make sure that they're learning those goals. And then there's two other things that are important. One, that you are looking at the program overall, and that you're looking at child outcomes, family satisfaction, and that you're really looking to make sure that the program itself is doing well, and that you're using that information to make decisions about how to support teachers, right? So that we're not saying that this is, the teacher just needs to do it, right?
Right.
No, we can't expect teachers, anybody, right, to be highly skilled and continue to do all of the things they need to do with just what they learned in undergraduate or even graduate school, right?
Yeah.
Continue to give teachers coaching and follow-up support to make sure that they are supported in doing the hard work that they're doing, and that those decisions are being made based on the data that you're collecting, like on child progress and on family satisfaction. And the data are collected and used to make those decisions. Supporting teachers is so critically important and a really important aspect of quality programs.
Oh, 100%. And I think too, and at least this has been my experience, that another beautiful aspect of inclusion is that year to year looks different because of the makeup of students, and like you said, and how your environment may change, or how the programs within the standards, like you said, change. But it takes us out of that habit of doing the same thing because this is what we've always done, and at least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And okay, so before we go, we talked a little bit about parents' perception of inclusion, but now we've spent all this time on the educator side of how to successfully implement evidence-based practice. I'm wondering that if we could wrap up the conversation today talking about the role that parents play in finding success in inclusion.
Yeah, and finding like inclusive placements.
Yeah, and just what they can do to help programs, because when you talk about the co-collaboration, and you just mentioned it, we need to be surveying parents, we need to be getting input, like that they're part of our co-collaborators. I mean, they have a seat at that table when it comes to IB. So when it comes to inclusion, we absolutely need to be including that. I just didn't know what kind of things can we be pulling from parents and including them on the process.
Oh, yeah. Well, making sure we know where we support parents in taking up space at the table and saying, yes, you get a spot at the table. And then making sure parents understand that we recognize they are experts on their child. They know their child best,
They do.
And so, they are the experts. And also making sure that we are, as the professionals, spending time it's a lot. I know we're putting a lot on teachers, but making sure that teachers know that they can build those relationships with families, and that we want them to have those relationships with families, and that ongoing communication with families. And that when families are busy, teachers are busy, we're all busy, and that there's going to be some kind of like dips in like how communicative we are, but making sure that families know that they can tell us when their child had a rough weekend, or they can tell us when, there's something big happening at home and their child might need some more love in the classroom this week, or might need, fewer demands just because they're moving, or there's like a big change happening at home. And so making sure that parents know that they can take up space and they can tell us what's going on, and then building that relationship. And then parents, know that your teachers are doing the best they can, absolutely doing the very best they can. And that, let's be honest with each other. Let's have this open communication. We're all there to support the child first and foremost. And so having this collaboration is just going to be critical. And kids see it. Children see it when teachers and parents I want to say get along, but they don't even have to be like best friends, but that they like communicate and talk to each other. That is meaningful for kids. Kids see that. No matter what we think, kids see that. And it can help the child know that they're valued, and that, there's this team that's, out there to support them.
Yes, absolutely. And the same is on the flip side of that is whenever we have adversarial relationships with parents. And a lot of times when I say adversarial, I mean at some point there's been a breakdown in communication. And, I don't think that necessarily enemies. I've never had enemies as an administrator or educator, but I think there's been breakdowns in communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
But children see that. And to what looks like a miscommunication to us, or what is a miscommunication to them, it looks like, well, my teacher doesn't like my mom, or my parents are against. And so then it kind of creates that role, that opportunity where students can try to, maybe manipulate one or the other into getting, playing off the miscommunication in parents. And so at least that's what I've seen. And I know it goes a lot deeper than my 30-second little explanation there. And the same, actually, with this conversation on inclusion. It's, we could talk hours and still not cover everything. What I'm kind of taking from everything is one of the biggest parts of making inclusion successful is the communication. And it's communication between educators, parents, administrators, whatever, everybody that has a role in that education of the child. Communication and collaboration. And those are the two things that I've heard you say the most today. Yep,
I would agree with those.
Well, Erin, we thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Anchored in Education today to talk more about inclusion.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I love talking about this.
Now, you can find Erin on social media. Just head over to my website, escottengland.com, and click the podcast tab at the top to find today's episode. You'll be able to read more about Erin as well as find those links on where to find her. And don't forget to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you get your podcasts. Most of you know I got my start as a one-on-one special education aide to students with autism. I was not in an inclusive classroom. And then, over the summer, I went to work at a summer autism camp. That was the first summer of several that I spent working with that camp. Part of our curriculum for students was to provide experiences within the community. These inclusive experiences are what began to get me to shift my mindset. Erin is right when she said at the beginning that it is about having people on board who can absorb the pushback and redirect people to the best practices on why high-quality inclusion programs are a necessity. When I transitioned the pre-K program I was in charge of to a full inclusion model, it came with great resistance and a lot of tears. It took a great deal of communication from the onset and ongoing as well. I have been gone from that program for several years now, and sadly, it has transitioned back to a secluded model. I'm not trying to place blame. In fact, if you listen to my conversation with Erin, you would understand that the majority of us, Erin and I included, were not introduced to inclusion when we began teaching. As humans, we tend to fall back into comfort zones. I am not exempt on this, which is why I try to work extra hard when falling back into practices that are not, in fact, best practices. Everyone deserves the opportunity to be included. After all, at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.